Well, greetings, friends and family, colleagues and comrades. This is Charles Patton, the PC, your people's counselor. I am here sitting in for Sister Simpson, your favorite community epidemiologist, and we are going to continue our discussion on health equities, also encompassing some other things around wellness and healthy living. And what that entails, as far as from our perspective, is that we want to have a conversation about the housing issues that's going on, because we know that that plays a big part in wellness. Getting rid of some of these other food deserts. They've been doing a great job up to this point with some of these community gardens and community produce production places, as well as putting the new jewels on Cottage Grove, which I heard Woodlawn hadn't had a full-service grocery store in over 40 years. So we're making some good strides, but we also need to talk about violence, mental health, and of course substance use. Those have been some of the scourges on our community for a long time. So once again, let's start our discussion on health equities. And normally what we like to talk about, or what we want to start with, is the paradigm of with diversity comes a cure. All right? If you can see this slide, with diversity comes a cure. And we got our partners who are working with us, so you can see those particular entities. And if you notice that we are collaborating with a lot of different agencies out there, because we know that this is not a one-dimensional problem. We know that it has been, it's been prolific over a number of years, particularly in certain areas. Okay, because I know recently we looking at some of the housing costs that's affecting a lot of people. I know with some of the major medical institutions, they have now started to include housing as a form of part of their wellness plan. So that all plays into that whole diversity of this particular approach. And of course, dealing with clinical trials. Now, a lot of us feel like, I don't want to be part of this guinea pig regimen. I don't want nobody studying me. But the reality of it is that if we don't do it, then who will? And unfortunately, what's happening, particularly for black men, is that we are coming up short on most fronts when it comes to health care. And there's several reasons for that. I don't want to kind of beat a dead horse or belabor the issue. But there's several reasons why black men particularly are coming up short, and we know that there's just a lack of access a lot of times, or a lot of times we just don't want to go into any of these particular services. All right, so with that being said, let me look at the next slide here. All right, now we're talking about what health equity look like, okay? And we're also looking at the fact that if you see what people have, this particular diagram, then you can see that we are talking about providing people with what they need. And just for your information, our favorite epidemiologist has entered the room, so we are going to have a conversation that will hopefully enlighten you and inspire you to become a part of this process. So, once again, greetings. How are you?
Okay, I am here again. Your favorite community epidemiologist, Sister Simpson, and I'm with Tacts, the Association of Clinical Trial Services. And I know you've already been talking to our Vice President of Tacts, the People's Counselor. So I know we're going to get into a little bit of a dialogue here as far as having an interview. But I do want you to go, if you can, to the next slide that talks about health equity, but health equity as it leads into liberation. And I mean, this quote to me, I think this picture really sets the stage for what we're trying to work on.
I agree.
We look at equity, or people say equality. You can see that on the left, right? And then, but equity is that everybody gets what they need, but liberation, baby, that's what I'm going for. I'm going for liberation. And we need to be liberated from some of these barriers and constraints that we are now facing. So, Mr. Patton, it's up to you. I know that we discussed violence.
Yes.
And you know that I see violence as a disease. That is now my new approach. Well, it is new for me. I have to be honest, and I talked about this our last show, that at one time I didn't see it as a dis-ease. But that which doesn't give you ease, as I've been instructed by one of my spiritual people that I'm going to be following, she says that which doesn't give you ease is a disease. I mean, she made it so plain and simple. So we talk about violence as a disease. We're working with LaShawn Ford and, of course, with Pastor Anthony Williams, who is actually the spearhead of this and getting that resolution done through the state. It's several iterations of it, but I'm part of at least the authorship of one of the resolutions that was given to Representative LaShawn Ford. So I have now pronounced this as a disease, and what I want to know from you, Mr. Charles, is where do you see that as in relationship to housing? I mean, I think you really want to talk and couch that around housing. Did you want to give some insight?
Well, when we talk about violence as a disease, and as I mentioned at the beginning, we know we're looking at a wellness paradigm that's encompassing all basic needs. Right? So when we think about the violence that's going on, particularly here in Chicago, we know that a lot of the young men that's coming in and out of these institutions don't have access to housing for whether it's funding reasons or whether it's legal reasons.
Exactly.
I know personally from my own experience, I've been having trouble placing people in certain transitional houses because it's within 500 feet of a school if they got a SO or a sex offender background, which that's a lot of
needs
taboo.
To be more insight on that and highlighted. If they've been formerly incarcerated, if they're federally have a record, I was told that they can't even be given federal subsidized housing, or what we call Section 8. And it's unfortunate because that is for the very people that we need it. So here we are talking about equity for the people that need what they need and they can't get it because they got a felony background that could have come from 20 years ago. It doesn't matter when it happened, but they're now cut out from having that type of housing.
Yes, and the other side of this is not only just those individuals, but we also find the people that's within that poverty line, that poverty scale that they put out. You know, if you're making anywhere between $15,000 and $30,000, it's hard to live in this city. You know, so you got to make a decision sometimes on whether you're going to buy food, pay your utilities, or pay rent.
Correct.
You know, and some of these conditions is causing people to lose their homes or to wind up on the street. And I mean, I got working people that's living on the street because they can't afford to pay rent. And of course, subsequently, when you out there in certain conditions, then violence is one of those things that you have to deal with because now you're at risk of being robbed, or if you're hungry, you're going to steal a chicken. It
was exposed, and it's exposed to these types of elements that are already violent to begin with. And as you talk about what poverty is, again, this is about how they restructured what we call now SNAP benefits, okay, which, I'm not in favor of how it was restructured, especially under Bill Clinton, in that it really disengaged and it dismantled family structures, whether we want to use the term they were laziness. But when you look at the data, you'll find that there were more people who were non-black who were on these subsidies, but were getting subsidized by the government anyway. I mean, we use these terms redlining, and we find out that some of these individuals were not middle class people, but yet was given middle class status because they can afford to get a Section 8 housing, where we as blacks were denied the exact same opportunities. And this is even among the people who were veterans, like myself. I'm a veteran. This was even among those who were middle class and well educated. They couldn't get the subsidized housing. So how is it that the people who are considered impoverished, and especially again, we're looking at, since Bill Clinton made that bill restructuring the SNAP program or the subsidies program with food stamps and other subsidies, they cannot get housing now.
And
what are we doing about this?
Well, I'm sure we also heard the phrase predatory lending.
Oh gosh, yes.
Okay, so that's been another big issue that's been affecting people of color.
We're cheated
extensively. You know, when it comes to, like you said, there's other ethnic groups that's at the same poverty scale, but they can get a loan at a different rate
that's
than somebody of our condition or our color.
Yes.
We get inflammatory interest rates. So subsequently, that sets us up. And if you're paying attention. Look at certain areas in the city, and we're going through this regentrification process. You can see there's more houses boarded up in Inglewood and Woodlawn,
right.
you know, in South Shore than any other areas in the city.
There's data to support, not only is it inflammatory, which is a public health term, but it's inflational. And what we're trying to say is that inflation with those interest rates that are above and beyond anybody else's when they get the same loans is why we're calling it predatory. So we really want to define that. We really want to make sure that we are specific. There is data to support that the poverty level among blacks is increasing. And more importantly, where they're living is even more desperate and segregated than back in 1960. Can you believe that?
Yes.
So one day I'm going to bring in the data to actually show you that data is at the Chicago Department of Public Health, where they have what we've called a compendium. But at any rate, the bottom line is that data is available where they show specifically the trends of poverty among blacks and whites and others, and blacks have fared the worst. So that's what we're talking about with violence.
Yes.
But you really wanted to, I think, have more of a conversation around mental challenges. We don't call it health because it's not healthy.
Mental illness.
Illness, and more importantly, substance abuse. Is there something you want to say to that effect? Because you do have a slide that does just kind of mention that.
And I definitely want to thank you for that lead in. I definitely want to couch it, as I say once again, this is not a one-dimensional problem, people. And it's going to require all of us to do some work. I want to applaud the hospital, Holy Cross.
Wow.
An advocate, because they've done some great work around opening up a mental health facility that's supposed to be state-of-the-art. And we already know that there's a lot of people out there that's suffering from mental illness that's not getting diagnosed, and let alone getting diagnosed and not getting treated.
Yes.
You know, so that's another big issue.
Okay, so diagnosis to treatment. So in one of your slides, I know that's there, that you're going to go to right now. We are looking at violence as a disease, but we're going to actually talk more on the whole aspect of mental health, or I have to be remiss and say mental challenge. And I love this slide. Let's go to it right now.
Yes.
Housing matters, people.
It matters.
Does housing matter?
That matters.
Does it? But why?
When you think about food, clothing, shelter,
Is that
basic needs.
Is that a basic need?
It's a basic need for everybody.
Now, some of y'all went to school and heard about this man called Maslow. Maslow tried to break it down for you and give you this so-called hierarchy. Let me be the first to tell you it's erroneous, it's wrong, because a hierarchy does not exist in a complex human being's lifestyle. We are not in a hierarchy. We are interchangeable and we are synergistic. So first of all, even if it was Maslow's law, it's not the law of which we live through, because your housing, your food, your health, your basic needs are not just subjective to a hierarchy as much as it's subjected to the complexity of you being a human and synergistic. Change the language, baby. Change the language. But nevertheless, what's on that list? Housing. If you ain't got a good place to stay, what does that mean to your health?
Well, that means it's hard to maintain any type of health regimen. It's hard to maintain a steady supply of food. It's hard to maintain a hygiene regimen if you ain't got nowhere to be.
Are you washing yourself up? I had to clean that up. We got a little inside joke with that one. But you need to be able to. So, Mr. Patton, so you're not having, and I'm going to jump on the health side of this. How can you adhere to your medication regimen, as you said, regimens, if you can't even figure out where your next meal is coming from, let alone where you laying your head down that night? And then you want me to talk about being on a regimen that I have to take and figure out what I'm doing in the next day? Stable housing means better health. I said it here first.
I agree wholeheartedly, and so does some of our medical institutions. They are now starting to have that language. Once again, I want to applaud a couple of our medical institutions, this one being UIC,
Whoa.
who has implemented a housing wellness component to their
There it
health
is.
paradigm. Okay, so
They buying enough of the property out there, so they might as well, because remember, UIC brought all that property that we used to call by another name, but that property that we used to go to around the 12th Street area is now was bought by UIC, University of Illinois Chicago. So it begs the reason, with all their surplus of profiting, that they should provide some type of housing for the people that they displaced.
Truly. And the good thing of it is that they are looking at that as part of their health maintenance piece. And what it's doing now is it is allowing people that need to be on certain medications
Right.
to get those medications, have some compliance and some oversight
Yes.
to make sure that they're in a position to where they can feel safe, where they can maintain their regimens, they can keep up with their medication, because we know we got a few shelters that house people periodically in different conditions. And a lot of times you go in there with your bag and you wake up and your stuff is gone. So those conditions are not very stable or healthy for people.
More importantly, they're not safe. So let's actually move into, and we're looking at the slide again. I want you to move into, we've talked about violence, we're talking about mental illness. I would like if you can move into what abuse is. As you can see on that actual slide we just left, they had the hands around the heart of the house. So how
Yes.
housing is impacting substance abuse, or the lack thereof. Mr. Patton.
Well, the lack of housing will allow people to, or at least force people to get in situations or conditions that they normally wouldn't be in. And of course, we call them flop houses or dope houses, where people go in and they set up camp and they use. And if you ain't got nowhere else to be, then 9 times out of 10, you're going to go in one of those places because you just want to get off the street, particularly in the winter months. And now that it's going to be 100 degrees,
You may not want to be in the house anyway,
well,
so now they're going to be on the
but
street.
it's a lot safer because sometimes being on the street can cause you some problems too in the heat. People drop dead from heat exhaustion, heat strokes.
Well, let's not claim that. We're going to do better this year. We do have places where if you are suffering from that, please dial 311. There are now more
Cooling
places
centers,
that have
yes.
cooling centers. So
Yes.
I'm not giving a shout out to the city of Chicago, but I am giving a shout out because your tax dollars paid for that service. And 311 is now more expansive. So now that your tax dollars are doing better with 311, please get to a cooling center. But again, substance abuse with housing. So can a person who has now been in recovery actually get housing?
We are looking at coming up with some strategies where people that have been formerly incarcerated and or substance abuse, because we know it's a big overlap,
Right.
are
Thank you for
getting
mentioning
access. Are getting access to some housing through what we call recovery homes or transitional houses where they get the support they need. We got this reentry program that I got to commend the brothers and particularly Danny Davis and a couple other legislators who've been staunch advocates.
Congressman Danny Davis, by
Yes,
the way, is our congressman.
Who've been the staunch advocates for promoting this particular service that's allowing formerly incarcerated individuals and recovering substance abusers to get in places that will allow them some safety where they can continue to maintain their recovery and maintain their health. This is good for our community because I've talked to several people who they want to help people.
Right.
But they don't want it in my backyard,
Don't want that in my neighborhood. I don't want that down the street from me. I don't want that halfway house of them people living with me.
Yes.
But there needs to be some concessions because that sounds like real corrections. We may need to be thinking about having correctional centers in our neighborhoods and not necessarily down where these people who don't look like them are benefiting. The benefit of having a correctional facility as people profit should maybe come to the communities where they live. What do you think about that one?
I am all for advocating. We call it community corrections,
Ooh.
right?
Who
And
wants to work on this?
there has been some pushes where we are looking to correct our own. Now, granted,
Real
that
community
if you
corrections.
are committing murders and doing other things, then there's a certain level of discipline or punishment that you have to get.
You do need
But
to
we
be punished
already
for that,
know
if
with
it's
the
not right.
legalization of marijuana,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
and they're reducing sentences for people who done had these petty convictions.
Shout out to Kim Fox. I think she's doing a
Yes.
fantastic job, and I hate that she's getting so much pushback, but she's doing the right thing. These petty offenses should not be taking up our tax dollars and housing people for no reason for something they should really be out on the streets for as an offense. It's like a
And
ticket.
that is our paradigm where we can get into a situation where we can start taking some of these vacant properties
Yes.
and housing our people with proper corrective measures, because we know that for a lot of them, they haven't even been habilitated, so it's hard to rehabilitate somebody who hasn't had the initial conditions to grow properly.
So what we're trying to ask is if there's some people out there, when we show this video to you all as well as people who can see this on YouTube, thank you CAN TV for making sure that every time our videos are placed on YouTube.
Yes.
What we're trying to ask is there are people that want to talk about real corrections. We need some housing. We need to build housing for those who can't stay in the house they're in. This does not necessarily have to be the Section 8. It needs to be a different type of alternative housing. So brothers and sisters who are recently released or have other
Treatment,
conditions,
yes.
or they have substance use abuse treatment or recovery, because they shouldn't be abusing, they should be in recovery mode. But we need to make sure that they're getting the real corrections that they need, or just need a place to stay, because right now going back to where they live is a trigger.
Yes, it
You
is.
know, that was the environment they came out of. Can't we find safe spaces and places for people that look like us, and we be the authors of their corrections?
I agree. Because recovery homes is a vital part of this. I mean, you know, they used to put children in orphanages. I'm not necessarily for that, but if you've been paying attention, we know that DCFS is under fire for some
Yes,
things,
you
and I
did.
applaud their work. But we know that it's hard to do anything on a very minuscule budget,
Right.
and if you don't have the support of the community. All right, so we're going to need each and every one of you to do your part and get involved in this. If you know anybody that's suffering, we got some resources for you. Like I mentioned, you can call 311, you know, get some information from the city. We got
Our
Simpson.
number, you can always call us too, and
Yeah.
we'll refer you to these places. We can show the slide where we have the information is there. Hey, who is that person right there? When he shows the slide. Thank you.
All right, there we go.
Yeah, he had to find the button. Anyway, the point is that we're getting ready to wrap up here, but here's our information. You see my name, Sister Ya. I'm your favorite community epidemiologist. We have Brother Patton. He is King Patton. He likes to be
Alright.
called Baba Patton.
Yes, indeed.
Charles Patton, who's our vice president for Tacts, and he's the People's Counselor. You can see our numbers are right there. But more importantly, if you don't get this information, Google me or Google him or Google me for sure, and you'll see my information. It is taxforus@gmail.com. Taxforus@gmail.com.
Okay.
And so what we need to think about is our conclusion here is if you're just sitting here watching, then we're going to ask you to call to action. Contact not just your state, city officials and legislators, but you need to come to some of these meetings and actually voice not just your opinion, but what you're willing to do in your actions to make this work. People hurt people, but heal people heal people. So we're going to get rid of our trauma aspects of us, and we're going to start going to our healing mode of us. And if that healing mode is in you, please come and share out your healing with us. And that is how we're going to continue to drive the spirit of reconciliation to our Most High, and more importantly, to spiritual beings having a human experience. Mr. Patton.
Well, I just want to say that, you know, it takes a village, and we are all part of that village So I need you all to come and share your information, share your input. If you got questions, if you got concerns, we need to hear them. So you saw our numbers. Please give us a call if you have any comments or questions that can help us to move in the right direction.
Yes.
All right, because it takes everybody. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's not a one-dimensional approach. Not a one-dimensional problem, and it's not going to be a one-dimensional solution. So we need everybody's input.
There it is.
Thank you.
Don't talk about it, be about it. Thank you.